And we're on air now. So I think what we'll do, let's just wait a few more minutes. It's 7 o'clock now. We'll wait probably about 5 minutes or so, 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll see how many people join. So we can give them a chance to get on, and then we'll get started. So does that sound all right?
Sounds good to me.
It's amazing. There's more people joining. That's good. See, I wanted to give them an opportunity to join us here before we get started, so we didn't have to start right away at 7. So those of you that have joined us, thank you. We're just going to wait a few minutes and let some others join before we get started. So I appreciate your patience. Probably should have some music, Sam.
Put it on the list for next time.
Yeah, put it on the list for next time. I don't know if I can work that technology yet, but we will. See if we can get a few more people to join us. I know I have a number of questions that have come in via Twitter and email, so we have those ready to go that we can cover off at the end as we get going. Sam, let's give them probably about 3 more minutes, and then we'll get started. All right?
Okay, that works for me.
Perfect. Again, those of you just joining, we're just going to wait a few minutes for some other people to join us, and then we'll get started talking about drafts on the first Little League U Live segment. Seems funny to say that, but kind of exciting at the same time. Again, those of you joining us, we're going to hold off for a few minutes. We'll get started here in about 2 or 3 minutes. Just letting a few more people join us. You can see, take a look at my messy office. I guess that's a good sign that I'm doing some things. Couple more minutes, Sam. 2 more minutes.
All right.
Again, those of you just joining us, just give us a few minutes. Wait for a few other people to join us. Then we'll get started. Mike just asked us, where's the Let's Go Little Leaguers music?
There's your soundtrack for next time.
That's the soundtrack for Little League U Live. That's pretty good. Pretty good. So, well, Sam, let's get started. First of all, those of you online, thanks for joining us. My name is Nick Caringi. I'm the Senior Director of Operations and Education for Little League Baseball and Softball. With us is Sam Rank. Sam's our League Development Manager and also our Director of Challenger. So, Sam, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Nick.
And we're going to just informally talk about drafts. One of the things, challenges that some leagues have is with regards to drafting their major divisions. And there are a number of ways you can draft your major divisions according to the guidelines outlined in the now the Little League Baseball rulebook under operations policies. So Sam and I are going to walk through the three of them. They're very general, very basic, but most of the time, some leagues have some issues with them. Maybe they're not following those three, and they should be. So Sam, why don't we share some slides, and we'll talk a little bit about just the draft procedures that are outlined in our operating policies.
All right, that sounds great, Nick. So before we jump into the specifics of the three draft plans that are available to leagues, let's talk a little bit about why the draft is important. And Nick, I know you have some experience on a local Little League board, but the draft is really one of the things that sets Little League apart. And its primary function is to ensure parity within the local league. I think we've all been there. We've all heard of an experience where there's a division of play within a league where you have one or two teams that are running the table all season long. And
it just
the draft
doesn't make
can help
it fun.
ensure that everybody has a great experience.
And it just doesn't make it fun. It really doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we love to see, and we know that all of our leagues love to see, is players coming back year after year and providing a great experience where everybody gets a chance to be competitive and be in the game can help accomplish that. So let's take a look at the three plans that are available to our local leagues. As Nick mentioned earlier, they're now available in the operating policy section of the rule book, which is a great benefit for leagues this year. So our first plan, Plan A, Nick, would you agree this is probably the plan that most of our leagues use?
Yeah, I have to think that most of our leagues do use the Plan A conventional draft. It's your typical draft plan. So I mean, with returning players remaining on the same team that they participated in last season, it's a little easier for some of the managers and the player agents to operate.
Yeah, absolutely. So under this plan, yes, players do remain on the same team. And after your player evaluation or your tryout, you're going to have your draft. And under Plan A, the last place team from the previous season is going to get the first pick in every round of the draft. Teams will continue drafting in that order until rosters are filled. So if on your team you have 12 players, or if everybody in the league is carrying 12 players on your roster, a team continues to draft until you hit that 12-player mark, and then your team's complete and you drop out of the draft at that point. So what we have here just visually to help explain this is a sample draft under Plan A where we have a 4-team league. And so you'll see in each round, we start out with the 4th-place team picking first, followed by the 3rd-place team, the 2nd-place team, and the 1st-place team. And as I mentioned, that order would continue until all the spots on every roster have been filled.
Right. And what's important too, Sam, is with this draft plan, it's not a serpentine draft, right? So you don't go 4th through 1st place and then 1st place picks again. It's 4th through 1, 4 through 1 in round 2, and so on. Pretty important to understand that.
Yep, absolutely. The second plan that's available to leagues, and this plan is a total redraft. It's our Plan B. And if you're looking to create parity, this may be the best option for your league.
Well, I got to tell you, there are some leagues, some of the more successful leagues, and especially in the Western region. I know we're only doing this draft, this certain Little League Live segment for the Central and the East Region League administrators and coaches. But there are a lot of leagues out in the West region that actually do a redraft every year, and they love it because it creates parity every year. You don't get a chance to, there's not a situation where a manager drafts a 9-year-old over an 11-year-old because he's building for the future, right? It's the total redraft. If you can get through the initial shock of redrafting, right, provides the best parity that there could be, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've heard from a number of folks is, in addition to that parity, it gives players the chance to experience coaching from different individuals. Everybody has their own techniques, and a lot of times by playing for 2 or 3 different individuals through your career, you can pick up different aspects of the game that make you more well-rounded.
And other coaches have other strengths that some coaches don't, right? So some coach might have, good hitting strength, good hitting teaching strength, and others might be stronger at pitching, teaching pitching or defense. So it's a good point.
Let's take a closer look at this. So Plan B has 2 parts. The first part of the draft includes players who are returning from a major team last year, and they'll be in the major division again this season, and they've already registered for the current season. So in part one, you're going to determine that draft order randomly, drawing numbers out of a hat, and you're going to go ahead and draft every player that played majors last year and is returning this year for a second season in the majors. Once that concludes, you'll then move over to this part two, which would include all players who are eligible for selection and have attended the required number of tryouts. So in order to be eligible for selection, you have to attend 50% of the tryouts that are available for that division. So after your returning players have been drafted, you would draft new players to the major division. There is an alternate method to complete this plan. So if you don't want to do the two-part draft, you actually have the option to put all the players into one pool. And the way that works is you begin the draft, and when you get down to the point where the number of returning major league players is equal to the number of remaining players to be drafted, then only the returning players can be selected. And that's important, and I know we'll probably talk a little bit later about duration of title.
Right.
But once you're drafted to a major league team, you have to remain on a major league team. You can't move back down to the minors.
That's the important point of it, Sam, really, because we don't want people to misunderstand the situation with regards to being drafted as a major leaguer, and then the next year you will be drafted again, whether you use Plan B, the first alternative, the first selection, or the alternative method. You have to make sure that every major league player is drafted onto another major league team. So, good point.
Unlike Plan A, Plan B actually does use a serpentine method for the draft. So you can see here on this slide, once again, looking at a sample 4-team league, you're going to start out with the fourth place team from last season, or if you randomly assign that order, since nobody's returning to the same team as last year, you can randomly assign that order. You're going to go team 4 through team 1, and then team 1 through team 4 in the second round, and so on until all the roster slots are filled. One thing that I do want to point out here is that if you are operating this in the draft method using the two-part draft, when part 1 concludes, the first pick of part 2 of the draft goes to the next team in the order. You don't reset at the beginning of your draft order.
Right. Good point.
The final method that is approved is actually a blind draft. And this method takes all players that are available, and you're going to put their names into a container, and you're going to basically pick names out of that container. It's a pretty simple method to operate, and there's 6 steps that we'll cover here quickly, but this method also goes a long way towards ensuring parity within the league.
Right.
So the first thing that you'll have to determine is pretty straightforward. You're going to need to look at the number of players that you had sign up and register and decide how many teams that you're going to have for the upcoming season. A couple of things to keep in mind when you're thinking about the number of teams. The most important is that you cannot have more than 8 12-year-olds on a given team. So that's going to guide you to some extent when you're determining the number of teams that you have. Second step is managers are going to be randomly assigned to a team or randomly given a team name. And then starting with step 3, what we're going to do is we're going to put all the registered 12-year-olds' names into a container, and each manager is going to pick a name out of that container until all the 12-year-olds are selected. After that, we're going to repeat that process with 11-year-olds. And if you have 10-year-olds and 9-year-olds in your major division, you'll repeat the process with 10-year-olds and 9-year-olds. Keep in mind that all 12-year-olds need to be drafted up to the major division.
Right.
So as you're considering methods to use, a couple of things to keep in mind that are helpful tips within the draft. You can only have 8 12-year-olds on a Little League team. It's important if you're using Plan A, especially to keep this in mind. Because you only have 8 12-year-olds, that means if you're using Plan A, you don't want to have more than 8 11-year-olds or 8 10-year-olds on your team, because looking forward, that would put you in a situation where you would have more than 8 12-year-olds on your team a few years down the road.
Right. Be preventative.
Yeah, absolutely. The blind draft that we talked about earlier, now, at the beginning we mentioned that the minor division and T-ball don't have to necessarily use a draft. It's only required for the major division and above.
Right.
But the blind draft actually works really well for those levels and can be adapted to those levels to help ensure parity in that you don't have individuals who may know who the best players are in the league trying to get all those players onto one team.
What Sam was referring to is offline. He and I we were talking about drafts, and we thought about and based on some of the questions that came in, and Sam, that's actually one of the questions that came in via Twitter was, what do you do for a minors draft? And it's been our experience that leagues like to use draft procedures for their minor leagues. They may, if they'd like. Obviously, you can't use the draft plan A because typically and by regulation, all minor league teams have to be dissolved after each year. So really, draft plan B is probably the best, and this one actually works really well too. But one thing to note, there's really no prescribed method to distribute players at the minor league division. We actually leave that up to the local leagues, although there are many local leagues that use draft plan B and draft plan C to actually disperse their talent. In some occasions, there are certain regulations, and there's a rule that permits the player agent and the league president to disperse talent with board approval, just to make sure that the minor leagues are dispersed and that there's parity, because it really truly is a training area, right? So that's a training division. So we want kids to have the ability to play as much as they can at that level. We want games to be, when I say competitive, we want them to be even, so that kids are actually having fun, kind of what Sam alluded to a little earlier. And I think, Sam, that's the key. You know, you talked about it earlier. When we get kids and teams that have, or divisions that have one team that dominates the whole division, and then there's a bottom tier team, the kids on that bottom tier team, you know, it's very likely that they're not having the best time, that losing every game. So this is why the drafts are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about best practices, especially with the minor division, a lot of our leagues may subdivide their minor divisions. It's very common for us to see a league that operates a 11-12 major and a 9-10 minor, especially at that 9-10 level. Our leagues that are successful, you really ought to consider having a player evaluation, a tryout, and a draft at that level, because it tends to be, while it's instructional, we tend to keep score, perhaps keep standings within the league, and it tends to be a little bit more competitive.
Okay, so we just finished off the slides. We have a few more questions. So Sam, if you want to bring your image back up, we'll be ready to go. I have a few more questions that came in via Twitter, and we're actually a little ahead of time, so we're in good shape in terms of our time. One question that came in, and again, we mentioned about the minor league draft and should there be a minor league draft, and I think we've covered that off pretty good. But the other question was duration of title, and kind of explain what duration of title really is.
Yeah, absolutely. So duration of title, a couple of aspects. First off, once you're drafted to a major division team, you remain in the major division. Specifically, if you're using draft plan A, once you're drafted to a team, duration of title means that you will remain a member of that team until you're either released from the league because you don't register to play, or you move up to the next division of play. So that's an important note. And that's a question that we field from time to time is, if I have a group of players that are 12 and they're moving to intermediate or to junior next year, do they stay together? Duration of title ends when you switch divisions. So when you go to intermediate or when you go to junior, everybody's going back into that same draft pool again.
Right. Very important to understand that. So we have one more question, and this will be our last question. We actually had a few that I think we covered off on most of the content that we talked about. But the question was, is this going to be archived for later use? And the answer is yes. We actually will archive this. We'll edit it down a little bit, and we'll place it on our Little League U site to make sure that we have the ability to put it in front of our league presidents. We'll put it in front of the managers and coaches. And actually, parents are really interested in this topic. Recently, we had a newsletter article talking about the drafts, and it was one of those articles that was really important and really got a lot of clicks, and people were really interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. We field a lot of calls here from parents wanting to know how the draft process works. How was my child placed on the team they're placed on? So very useful content for parents as well.
So we're a little early, but we finished up in good time. We wanted to keep this nice and short and brief. The one thing that we didn't cover off on were the draft options, right? So the brother sibling options, the manager's options, and we're going to cover that off on another topic on another session. So be on the lookout for that. We'll probably do that very shortly. But for those of you that did join us, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We hope this was helpful. It's a kind of a new technology we're testing, and we're hopeful that we can bring you more of these. So thanks for joining us on our Little League U live segment. Sam, thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Nick.
All right, guys. Hey, take care, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.